The rifle slipped from Eli Harper's hands. 3 years of silence. 3 years of nothing but ghosts and snow and the weight of 2 small graves behind his cabin. But the sight before him, a woman on her knees in frozen mud scraping rotted scraps from a broken barrel, while 2 children huddled behind her, their lips blue, their eyes hollow. That sight cracked something inside him he thought had died with Josie and Lily. "Get your things," he heard himself say, his voice rough from disuse. "You're coming home with me." Subscribe now and follow this story to the end. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The first gunshot split the December air like breaking bone. Eli Harper pulled his mare to a halt, breath clouding in the bitter Wyoming wind. His hand moved to the Colt at his hip, instinct carved from battlefields he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Second shot. Closer now. Then a child's scream. His fingers tightened on the reins. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to turn around to ride back up the mountain, where nothing could touch him, where the silence kept him safe from feeling anything at all. A third shot, a woman's voice sharp with terror. "Damn it," Eli muttered. He spurred his horse forward. The Henderson cabin sat crooked against the gray sky, its roof sagging under the weight of old snow. 3 men on horseback circled the structure like wolves around wounded prey. Eli recognized the lead rider immediately. Ezra Blackwood in his fine wool coat and polished boots, looking as out of place in this wilderness as a rattlesnake in a church pew. "Come out, Mrs. Sutton." Blackwood's voice carried across the clearing smooth as oil on water. "Your husband's debts don't disappear just because he does. Pine Creek Bank doesn't forget." One of Blackwood's men, a thick-necked brute Eli knew as Jennings fired his pistol into the air. The shot made the horses dance and sent a flock of crows screaming from the nearby pines. "We ain't leaving without them papers," Jennings called out. "Make this easy on yourself and the young'uns." The cabin door cracked open. A shotgun barrel emerged first, followed by a woman who stood straighter than any scared widow had a right to. "You fire another shot near my children," she said, her voice steady as stone, "and I'll show you what easy looks like." Eli's breath caught. She was too thin with dark circles under her eyes and a threadbare coat that couldn't have kept out a spring breeze, let alone a Wyoming winter. But she held that shotgun like she knew how to use it, and something in her stance told him she'd pull the trigger if she had to. Behind her, 2 faces peered around her skirts. A girl of maybe 11, with fierce, protective eyes that reminded Eli of a cornered mountain cat. And a boy, younger maybe 8, pressed tight against his sister, his small body racked with coughs that carried even across the clearing. That cough. Eli knew that cough. Had listened to it grow worse night after night while he'd prayed and bargained and begged God for mercy that never came. Blackwood laughed a cold, sharp sound. "Mrs. Sutton, I admire your spirit, I truly do. But that shotgun holds 2 shells, and I've got 3 men. Simple arithmetic." "Then you'd better hope you're not standing in front when I choose." The third rider, younger than the others, with Blackwood's own angular features, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Father, perhaps we should—" "Quiet, Marcus." Blackwood didn't take his eyes off the widow. "I'm giving you until sundown, Mrs. Sutton. Produce those survey documents and we'll discuss a reasonable arrangement. Refuse and I'll return with the sheriff and a legal eviction notice. Either way, this cabin becomes bank property by morning. This cabin belongs to nobody but the wind and the termites. My husband rented it, nothing more." "Ah, but your husband owed considerable sums, debts that transfer to his widow." Blackwood smiled the kind of smile that made Eli's trigger finger itch. "I'm a patient man, ma'am, but my patience has limits." Eli had heard enough. He nudged his mare forward, emerging from the tree line with deliberate slowness. His hand rested on his thigh, inches from his holster, and he kept his shoulders loose, his breathing even. 3 years of solitude hadn't dulled the instincts that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. "That's enough, Blackwood." All heads turned toward him. For a moment, surprise flickered across the banker's face, Genuine surprise, the kind that told Eli his reputation as a ghost was well earned. Then Blackwood's expression smoothed into careful neutrality. Well, well. Eli Harper, the hermit of Harper Ridge. Blackwood tipped his hat mock polite. Thought you'd died up on that mountain of yours. Thought wrong. This is bank business, Harper, nothing that concerns you. Eli guided his horse between Blackwood and the cabin, positioning himself as a barrier. He felt the widow's eyes on his back, felt the weight of her confusion and hope and fear, but he didn't turn around. Firing at a house with children inside makes it my concern. Jennings snorted. Who made you sheriff? Don't recall saying I was sheriff. Eli's voice dropped lower, quieter, the voice he'd used when commanding men through cannon fire and chaos. Said it was my concern. Different thing. Blackwood studied him with those cold gray eyes, calculating odds, measuring risks. Eli stared back, letting the banker see exactly what kind of man he was dealing with, or rather, what kind of man he'd been before grief had hollowed him out. The silence stretched. Finally, Blackwood gathered his reins. Very well. We'll continue this conversation another time, Mrs. Sutton, when you've had a chance to reconsider your position. He wheeled his horse, then paused, looking back at Eli. Harper, word of advice. Some ghosts should stay buried. Getting involved in matters that don't concern you tends to end badly. I'll keep that in mind. Blackwood rode off, his men following. Marcus, his son Eli, realized, glanced back once, with an expression that might have been apology, before disappearing into the trees. Eli waited until the hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he allow himself to turn toward the cabin. The widow hadn't lowered her shotgun. If anything, it was now pointed more directly at his chest. Ma'am, Eli said carefully. I thank you for your assistance, Mr. Harper. Her voice was calm, controlled, betraying nothing. But I'll ask you to state your intentions clearly. No intentions, just passing through. Passing through from where to where your ranch is 8 miles north. This trail leads nowhere but deeper into the mountains. Smart. She was smart. Eli felt a reluctant flicker of respect. Was tracking a deer. Heard shots. And decided to intervene out of the goodness of your heart. Something like that. The girl behind her skirts tugged at her mother's coat. Mama, Sammy's coughing again. The boy Sammy had slumped against the doorframe, his small body shaking with each breath. Even from this distance, Eli could see the unhealthy flush in his cheeks, the way his chest labored. The widow's composure cracked for just a moment. Her eyes darted to her son, and Eli saw the fear she'd been hiding. Not fear of Blackwood, not fear of the armed stranger on horseback, but the deeper terror of a mother watching her child slip away. He knew that fear. Had lived inside it for 3 endless days, while Samuel's coughs grew weaker, and the snow grew deeper, and the mountain passes stayed blocked. That boy needs to be warm, Eli heard himself say. Your cabin won't hold against another storm. Roof's about to cave. The widow's chin lifted. We've managed thus far. Mama, the girl again more urgent. He's burning up. Something shifted in the widow's face. The shotgun lowered an inch. 2. My ranch is 5 miles north. Eli said the words coming unbidden, unwanted, unstoppable. Sturdy walls, warm hearth. He looked away, uncomfortable with his own offer. Just until the storm passes. We can't pay you. Wasn't asking for payment. The widow stared at him, really stared, like she was trying to read his soul through his eyes. Eli let her look. He had nothing to hide except 3 years of grief, and that was written plain enough on his face for anyone with eyes to see. I'm Clara Sutton, she said finally. These are my children, Emma and Samuel. Ma'am, why are you helping us, Mr. Harper? The truth. Eli's jaw tightened. The truth was complicated, a tangle of old guilt and fresh pain, and the ghost of a little girl with his wife's smile, who'd asked for her mama right up until the end. Some things you just do, he said. No reason needed. Clara Sutton watched him a moment longer. Then she lowered the shotgun completely and turned to her children. Emma, pack only what we need. Clothes, blankets, your father's chest. Nothing else. Yes, Mama. The girl Emma moved quickly despite her obvious exhaustion. She had her mother's practicality, Eli noted, and something else too. Something hard and watchful that no 11-year-old should have in her eyes. While the widow gathered her son, wrapping him in every blanket they owned, Eli checked the lean-to beside the cabin. A single draft horse stood shivering inside, too thin, too tired, but still standing. Beside it sat a wagon that had seen better decades. Axles cracked, he muttered, examining the undercarriage. Won't make it far in this snow. I know. Clara appeared behind him, Samuel cradled against her chest. We've been stranded here since the first storm. I'll lead on horseback. You follow with the wagon, slow and steady. If the axle breaks, we'll figure something out. And if Blackwood returns before we're clear. Eli checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded. Then he'll find more waiting than he bargained for. The journey should have taken 2 hours. It took 4. The snow had drifted higher than Eli expected, and the wagon moved painfully slow through the deepening white. Twice the axle groaned ominously, forcing them to stop, while Eli reinforced it with rope and prayer. 3 times they had to dig out the wheels. Throughout it all, Samuel's coughing grew worse. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, his small body burning with fever despite the cold. Emma sat rigid beside her mother, one hand constantly touching her brother's forehead, her young face set in grim determination. How long has he been sick? Eli asked during one of their stops. A week. Clara's voice was flat, exhausted. Started as a cold. I thought it would pass. He needs medicine. Willow bark tea at minimum. Maybe a doctor. We had no willow bark, and the doctor in town... Clara's mouth twisted. Dr. Patterson is Blackwood's man. He refused to see us, said he couldn't treat patients who owed the bank money. Eli said nothing. There was nothing to say to that kind of cruelty. But something cold settled in his chest, something that felt almost like the old anger he'd buried alongside Josie and Lily. He'd forgotten what it felt like to care enough about anything to feel angry. He wasn't sure he liked being reminded. The sun was setting when they finally crested the ridge overlooking Eli's ranch. The cabin sat in the valley below, smoke rising from the chimney, where he'd banked the morning's fire, the barn solid and dark against the snow. Behind the cabin, just visible in the fading light, 2 small crosses marked where his world had ended. It's beautiful, Emma said quietly, the first words she'd spoken in hours. Eli said nothing. He'd stopped seeing beauty in this place 3 years ago. Now it was just walls and silence, and the weight of memories he couldn't escape. They reached the cabin as darkness fell. Eli helped Clara carry Samuel inside, while Emma led the horses to the barn with surprising competence for a city-raised girl. The cabin's interior was spare but warm, the fire still crackling steadily in the stone hearth. Eli directed Clara to lay Samuel on the sofa near the heat while he fetched the tin of dried herbs Josie had kept, herbs he hadn't touched since her death couldn't bear to touch because they still smelled faintly of her hands. Willow bark, he said, setting the tin beside Clara. For the fever. There's other things in there too. Elderflower, dried mint. My wife was... He stopped. The words tangled in his throat. Was she a healer? Clara asked gently. Midwife, mostly. Clara's eyes softened the first crack in her careful armor. I'm sorry for your loss. Eli turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire. I'll show your daughter to the spare room. You tend to your boy. He found Emma in the barn brushing down the horses with movements that spoke of practice and familiarity. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. You have a nice barn, she said. Our barn in Denver was smaller. Denver. Before Papa's work brought us here, Emma's brushstrokes slowed. He was a surveyor for the railroad. I heard. Mr. Blackwood killed him. The words hung in the cold barn air, stark and brutal and utterly matter-of-fact. Eli studied the girl, her fierce eyes, her rigid spine, the way she held herself like she was ready to fight the whole world if necessary. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Emma met his gaze directly. Papa found out bad things about Mr. Blackwood. He was going to tell important people. Then he went fishing one morning and never came back. They said he drowned. But you don't believe that. Papa grew up on a river. He could swim better than fish. Emma's voice cracked slightly. And he never went fishing without telling me goodbye. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out an extra blanket. "The spare bedroom's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the left. There's a bed big enough for you and your mother. Your brother should stay downstairs near the fire tonight." Emma accepted the blanket, clutching it to her chest. She started toward the barn door, then stopped. "Mr. Harper." "Yeah." "Why do you live alone up here? Where's your family?" Eli's hand stilled on the horse's bridle. Through the barn's dusty window, he could just see the two crosses on the hill, their shadows long in the moonlight. "With her mother," he said quietly, "and her mother's with God." Emma was silent. Then, with the peculiar grace of children who understood grief too well, she simply nodded and slipped out into the cold. That night, Eli sat by the fire while Samuel slept fitfully on the sofa, and Clara dozed in the chair beside him, exhaustion finally claiming her. Emma had retreated upstairs an hour ago, though Eli suspected she wasn't sleeping any more than he was. The cabin felt different with people in it. Fuller, louder even in silence. For 3 years, the only sounds had been wind and fire and his own heartbeat. Now there was breathing, shifting, the occasional murmur from Samuel's fevered dreams. It should have been uncomfortable, should have felt like an invasion of his carefully constructed isolation. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long, cold sleep. Clara stirred around midnight, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then memory returned, and with it the weight of her circumstances. "He's breathing easier," Eli said quietly, nodding toward Samuel. "Tea's helping." Clara touched her son's forehead, relief flickering across her face at whatever she found there. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, for all of this." "Eli." "Eli." She tested the name, then nodded. "Thank you, Eli." He should have accepted the thanks and let silence return. Should have retreated to his own bed and left this woman to her vigil. Instead, he heard himself ask, "What's in those documents Blackwood wants so badly?" Clara's expression shuddered. "What makes you think there are documents? He mentioned survey papers, and your daughter said your husband found something worth killing for." For a long moment, Clara simply looked at him, weighing, measuring. Eli waited. He understood caution had lived inside it for 3 years. Finally she spoke. "My husband discovered that Blackwood has been using inside information to buy land along the planned railroad route. He purchases properties for almost nothing. Sometimes through intimidation, sometimes through fraud, then sells them to the railroad company at 10 times the price. Common enough crime in these parts? Perhaps. But Will found more than simple land fraud." Clara's voice dropped. "He found evidence that Blackwood has connections in the federal land office. Someone feeding him information about the route before it's officially announced. And he found..." She hesitated. "He found signs that Blackwood has arranged for people to disappear. Homesteaders who refused to sell. A journalist who asked too many questions. My husband was gathering proof. And then he died. And then he was murdered." Clara's jaw tightened. "They found his body at the bottom of a cliff near our cabin. The sheriff ruled it an accident. Said Will must have slipped while hiking. But Will had a bruise on the back of his head. Not the front where it would be if he'd fallen face first. The back." Clara's eyes burned with a fury that Eli recognized, the kind of anger that kept you alive when everything else wanted you dead. And his boots were clean, not a speck of mud, not a scratch. As if someone had changed them after. Eli processed this. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity, a pattern of corruption covered by murder protected by the very men sworn to uphold the law. "The documents," he said. "Where are they?" "In a chest under our wagon seat." Will's journals survey maps letters between Blackwood and someone in Washington. Everything he gathered before. Clara's voice caught. Before. Blackwood knows you have them. He suspects. That's why he's been trying to drive us out first with legal pressure, then with threats. He thinks if he can force us to leave, we'll abandon everything behind, including evidence he can destroy. Will you? Clara's eyes met his directly. Mr. Blackwood murdered my husband Eli. He's trying to steal from families who have nothing. He's corrupted the law in 3 counties, and probably more. Her hands clenched in her lap. I will see him answer for his crimes if it's the last thing I do. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, wind howled around the eaves, carrying fresh snow against the windows. Why tell me this? Eli asked. Because tomorrow or the day after, when this storm clears, Blackwood will come back. He'll bring more men and a legal excuse to take everything we have. Clara leaned forward slightly. And I need to know when that happens, will you help us, or will you step aside and let him win? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications Eli wasn't ready to face. Helping meant involvement. Involvement meant caring. And caring meant opening himself up to loss again. He thought of Josie, her gentle hands and laughing eyes. He thought of Lily, who'd never gotten to see her 5th birthday. He thought of the promise he'd made standing at their graves, that he'd never again let anyone close enough to hurt him. Then he looked at Samuel, fevered and fragile on his sofa. At Emma, who carried grief far too heavy for her young shoulders. At Clara, who'd lost everything and still found the strength to fight. Your husband, Eli said slowly. What unit did he serve with during the war? Surprise flickered across Clara's face at the change of subject. The 12th Pennsylvania Infantry. Why? Eli's chest tightened. The 12th Pennsylvania. One of the units he'd led through the worst fighting at Shiloh, when the world had turned to blood and smoke and screaming. Did he ever mention his commanding officer? Sometimes. He spoke highly of his captain, said the man saved his life more than once. Clara's brow furrowed. Why do you ask? Eli stood abruptly, moving to the window where the night pressed black and cold against the glass. His reflection stared back at him, older, grayer, more broken than the young captain who'd commanded men through hell. Because that captain was me, he said quietly. Silence. Then Clara was beside him, her hand touching his arm, the first contact she'd initiated between them. You're him, she breathed. The one Will talked about. Captain Eli Harper of the... Don't. Eli's voice was sharper than he intended. That man died a long time ago. He didn't die. He retreated. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. There's a difference. Before Eli could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Both of them froze. It was well past midnight. No one visited Eli's ranch uninvited. No one. Eli moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. A single figure stood on the porch, hunched against the cold features obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Who is it? Clara whispered. Eli's hand moved to his holster. Stay here. Keep the children quiet. He crossed to the door, positioned himself to one side, and pulled it open in one swift motion, gun raised and ready. The figure on the porch raised his hands quickly. Please, I'm not armed. I came to warn you. That voice. Eli recognized it. Marcus Blackwood, Ezra's son, stood shivering in the moonlight, his expensive coat inadequate against the mountain cold, his face pale with fear. My father is coming, Marcus said, words tumbling out in a rush. At dawn, 8 men all armed. He's hired extra hands with orders to arrest Mrs. Sutton and seize everything she has. The young man's voice cracked. By force if necessary. Behind Eli, Clara's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. Why are you telling us this? Eli demanded. Marcus's eyes met his, and in them Eli saw something unexpected. Shame. Genuine, bone-deep shame. "Because I watched my father become a monster," Marcus whispered, "and I can't watch it anymore." The storm was coming. Not just the snow, though, that was building on the horizon, clouds heavy and dark against the midnight sky. Another storm entirely. One made of guns and horses and a banker's vengeance. And Eli Harper, who had spent 3 years trying to disappear from the world, found himself standing directly in its path. Marcus Blackwood stood trembling on the porch, snow collecting on his shoulders like a shroud. Eli kept his gun raised, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. "Give me one reason not to put a bullet in you right now," Eli said quietly. "Because I'm trying to save their lives." Marcus's voice broke. "Please, I know what my father is. I've known for years. But this threatening women and children, burning people out of their homes, I can't be part of it anymore." Clara appeared at Eli's shoulder, her shotgun held ready. "How do we know this isn't some trick your father sends you ahead to gain our trust then? Then what, you're already trapped?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You have nowhere to go in this storm. If my father wanted you dead, he wouldn't need tricks. He'd just wait until morning and ride in with his men." The logic was sound. Eli hated that the logic was sound. "Inside," he ordered, stepping back. "Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus entered the cabin with the careful movements of a man who understood he was one wrong step from a grave. His eyes swept the room, taking in Samuel's sleeping form on the sofa, Emma's pale face appearing at the top of the stairs. "The boy," Marcus said softly. "He's sick." "What do you care?" Emma's voice was sharp as broken glass. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I'm not my father." Marcus turned to face them, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "I never wanted any of this. The land deals the intimidation, He swallowed hard. "Mr. Sutton's death." Clara went rigid. "What do you know about my husband's death?" "Nothing concrete. Nothing I could prove." Marcus met her eyes. "But I know my father came home the night before Mr. Sutton's body was found and his clothes were wet. I know he burned those clothes the next morning, and I know he smiled when the sheriff delivered the news." The silence that followed was absolute. Eli watched Clara's face cycle through shock, fury, and something that looked almost like relief, the terrible validation of suspicions she'd carried alone for months. "Why are you telling us this now?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Because tonight at dinner, my father was drinking. Celebrating." Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. "He said that by this time tomorrow, the Sutton problem would be solved permanently. When I asked what he meant, he looked at me and said, 'Some weeds need to be pulled up by the roots, son. All of them.'" Emma made a small sound of terror. Clara's arm wrapped around her daughter, pulling her close. "He means to kill us," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "He means to make sure no one can testify against him. Ever." Marcus looked at Eli. "I know who you are, Mr. Harper. I know what you did during the war. My father knows too. He recognized you years ago. He's been waiting for an opportunity to settle that score." Eli's blood ran cold. "What score?" "My older brother William. He died at Shiloh." Marcus's voice softened. "In a charge against Union positions. Your positions, Captain Harper. My father has never forgotten. When he realized you were helping Mrs. Sutton." Marcus spread his hands helplessly. "You're not just an obstacle anymore. You're a target." The pieces crashed together in Eli's mind with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about land fraud or stolen documents. This was personal. Blood calling for blood across a decade of nursing hatred. "Why help us?" Eli demanded. "He's your father." "He was my father." Marcus's jaw tightened. The man who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, that man died a long time ago. What's left is something I don't recognize anymore, something that frightens me." He paused. "And something I won't let destroy innocent children just to satisfy his vengeance." Clara stepped forward. "If we testify against your father, it will destroy your family's name, your reputation, everything." "I know. And you're willing to accept that?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted to Samuel, still sleeping fitfully by the fire, his small chest rising and falling with each labored breath. "My brother died in the war," Marcus said quietly. "He was 19 years old. He believed in something, right or wrong, he believed. My father has spent every day since then twisting that loss into an excuse for evil. I won't let William's death be used to justify murdering children." His voice hardened. "Some things matter more than family name." Eli holstered his gun. The movement was instinctive, a recognition of something genuine beneath Marcus's fear. "8 men at dawn," Eli said. "What route are they taking?" "The main road through Copper Creek Pass. My father assumes you'll try to run south toward town, so he's positioned men to cut off that retreat. And the north road, unwatched as far as I know, but it leads deeper into the mountains. In this weather, you'd never make it through to Helena." Clara and Eli exchanged glances. The same thought passed between them, the documents in the wagon, the evidence that could bring Blackwood down useless if they died frozen in a mountain pass. "There's another way," Emma said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood on the bottom stair, clutching the railing with white-knuckled hands, her young face set with determination. "Papa talked about it. The old mining trail past Eagle Cave. It's longer, but it connects to the Helena Road eventually." Emma swallowed hard. "He said he hid something there, something important, in case anything happened to him." Clara's breath caught. "Emma, what are you talking about?" "Papa gave me a letter before he died. He made me promise not to read it unless something bad happened." Emma's voice wavered. "Something bad happened, Mama. I read it." She pulled a folded paper from beneath her nightgown, a letter worn and creased from being hidden against her heart. With trembling hands, she held it out to her mother. Clara took it like it was made of glass. Her eyes moved across the familiar handwriting, and Eli watched as tears began to track silently down her cheeks. "Will," she breathed. "Oh, Will." "What does it say?" Eli asked gently. Clara read aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I've hidden copies of everything, the most important evidence, in Eagle Cave behind the owl carving near the back chamber. If anything happens to me, take the children and find Captain Eli Harper. He lives north of town on the mountain. I served under him during the war, and I know him to be a man of honor. He will protect you when I cannot. Tell Emma, I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye. Tell Samuel to be brave. And know that I loved you, all of you, more than life itself. Your Will." The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and Samuel's ragged breathing. "He knew," Clara whispered. "He knew they were going to kill him. And he knew about you, Eli. He trusted you to save us." Eli felt the weight of those words settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. A dead man's trust. A promise he'd never made, but was now bound to keep. "Eagle Cave is 6 miles east," he said slowly. "Through rough terrain. In good weather, it's a hard half-day's journey. In this storm—" "Can it be done?" Clara asked. Eli looked at Samuel, at the fever still burning in his cheeks, at Emma, exhausted but fierce, at Clara, who had already lost everything and still refused to break. "It can be done," he said, "but we leave now, before the storm worsens, before Blackwood's men have a chance to set their trap." Marcus straightened. "I can delay them. If I return home and tell my father I spotted you heading south toward town, he'll redirect his men, buy you a few hours at least." "That's a death sentence," Clara said. "When he finds out you lied, then he finds out." Marcus pulled on his gloves, his expression resolved. Some debts are paid in blood, Mrs. Sutton. I owe a debt to my brother's memory, to who my father used to be. He looked at Eli, and maybe to the men who died because of what the Blackwood family has become. Before anyone could argue, he slipped out into the night, vanishing into the swirling snow like a ghost. The preparations took less than an hour. Eli worked with grim efficiency, saddling horses, loading essentials onto his strongest mare. There was no time to take the wagon too slow, too visible. They would ride Clara and Samuel on one horse, Emma on another, with Eli leading the way on foot through the worst of the snow. "The documents," he said to Clara as she wrapped Samuel in every blanket they owned. "We need to bring them. I've packed them in my saddlebag. Will's journals, the letters, the maps, everything." Clara's hands moved with steady precision, despite the fear in her eyes. "If we can reach Eagle Cave, we'll have everything we need to destroy Blackwood. And if we don't reach it," Clara met his gaze, "then we die knowing we tried." Eli nodded. He could respect that kind of resolve. Emma appeared beside him as he secured the last of their supplies. She carried her father's letter pressed against her chest, guarding it like a sacred relic. "Mr. Harper." "Yeah. Papa said you saved his life at Shiloh, that you carried him through gunfire when everyone else ran." Eli's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. It wasn't that long. Emma's eyes held his with uncomfortable directness. "And you're doing it again. Carrying us when everyone else would run." He didn't know what to say to that. The comparison felt wrong, somehow unearned. He'd failed to save Josie. Failed to save Lily. Whatever heroics he'd managed during the war had been erased by those two small graves behind his cabin. "We should move," he said gruffly. "Every minute we wait is a minute Blackwood gains." They left the cabin just before 2 in the morning, slipping away under cover of darkness and snow. Eli led them north first, away from the logical paths, circling through terrain so rough that no sane man would attempt it in winter. Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness, his small body burning against Clara's chest. Twice she called for them to stop so she could check his breathing, her face tight with fear each time. Twice she pronounced him stable enough to continue, though Eli could see the lie in her eyes. The boy was getting worse. They all knew it. Dawn found them high on a ridge overlooking the valley they'd left behind. The snow had thinned slightly as they climbed, but the cold was brutal, cutting through their layers like knives. Eli called a halt beneath an overhang of rock, just enough shelter to rest the horses and warm their hands over a tiny fire. "How much farther?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. 3 miles to Eagle Cave, maybe 4. Eli studied the sky, reading the weather with a soldier's practiced eye. "Another storm's coming, bigger than last night. We need to reach the cave before it hits." "Sammy won't make it in another storm." Emma's voice was quiet but certain. "He needs warmth, real warmth, not just blankets." Eli looked at the boy in Clara's arms, at his blue-tinged lips and shallow breathing. Emma was right. They all knew she was right. "Then we don't stop again until we reach the cave," he said, "no matter what." They pushed on. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed loose rocks hidden beneath snow ravines that appeared without warning, slopes so steep the horses had to be led rather than ridden. Eli broke trail with his body stamping down snow and testing footholds before signaling the others to follow. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned with each breath of frozen air. But he didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Because every time he wanted to stop, he looked back at Samuel's pale face and saw Lily's instead. "Eli," Clara's voice cut through his focus. "Eli, stop." He turned, already dreading what he'd see. Clara had dismounted, was holding Samuel against her chest with one arm, while her other hand pressed against the rocks beside the trail. Her face was chalk white. "He's not breathing right. Something's changed." Eli moved quickly, taking the boy from her arms. Samuel was lighter than he should have been, all bones and fever, no weight at all. His chest barely moved, and when it did, there was a terrible rattling sound that Eli recognized from too many deathbeds. "His lungs are filling up," Eli said grimly. "Fluid from the fever. We need to get him upright. Keep his head elevated." "I know." Clara's voice cracked. "I know what's happening. I've seen it before." She grabbed Eli's arm, her grip desperate. "How far?" "Half a mile, maybe less." "Can he make it?" Eli looked at the boy in his arms, at the fragile rise and fall of his chest, at the shadows under his eyes, at the way his small hands had stopped clutching at blankets and now lay limp at his sides. "He has to," Eli said. He started walking, not running. Running would jostle the boy too much, but moving with a fierce ground-eating stride that ate up the distance as fast as humanly possible. Behind him, Clara and Emma scrambled to keep up, leading the horses over terrain that wanted to kill them. The cave appeared through the swirling snow like a miracle. It was larger than Eli had expected, its mouth, a dark slash in the rocky hillside, partially obscured by drifted snow. Warmth rose from within, geothermal, he realized, from hot springs somewhere deep in the mountain. The air smelled of minerals and damp stone. "Inside," he ordered. "Quickly." They stumbled into the darkness, horses and humans alike desperate for shelter. The temperature rose noticeably as they moved deeper, the brutal cold giving way to something almost comfortable. Emma found dry wood along the cave walls, old timber from the abandoned mining operation, and Eli built a fire with hands that shook from exhaustion. As the flames caught and grew warm, light filled the chamber, revealing walls scarred with pickaxe marks and tunnels that disappeared into blackness. "Here." Clara had spread blankets near the fire, creating a bed for Samuel. "Eli, help me." Together they positioned the boy with his head elevated, propping him against rolled blankets to keep his airways as clear as possible. Clara worked with efficient desperation, stripping away wet clothes, replacing them with dry layers from their packs, pressing her ear to his chest to listen. "He's still breathing," she reported, but her voice held no relief. "Just barely." "The documents," Eli said. "Your husband's letter mentions something hidden here. If we're going to be trapped by the storm, we should find it while we can." Clara nodded but didn't move from her son's side. "Emma knows. Will wrote her a letter too. He told her where to look." Eli turned to the girl who sat huddled near the firearms wrapped around her knees. "Emma, can you show me?" She looked up, exhaustion and grief making her seem younger than her 11 years. Then she nodded and pushed herself to her feet. "Papa said to look for the owl carving, in the back chamber." They left Clara with Samuel and ventured deeper into the cave, Eli carrying a makeshift torch of burning timber. The walls narrowed as they walked, forcing them to turn sideways in places, and the air grew warmer and more humid with each step. "There." Emma pointed to a shadowed alcove ahead. Eli raised the torch. Carved into the rock, worn but still visible, was the rough outline of an owl with a cross beneath it, just as Will Sutton's letter had described. "Papa told me about this place," Emma said quietly. "He brought me here once when we first arrived. Said it was our secret. He made me memorize the owl's location in case anything happened." Her voice caught. "I thought he was just being careful. I didn't know he was planning for his own death." Eli placed a hand on her shoulder, surprising himself with the gesture. "Your father was protecting his family, the best way he knew how." Emma wiped her eyes fiercely, refusing to cry. "Help me dig. He said to look where earth meets stone." They found the metal box 6 inches below the cave floor, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Eli pried it open, revealing a stack of documents, a leather-bound journal, and a sealed letter addressed to Captain Eli Harper. His hands stilled on the envelope. "That's for you," Emma said. "Papa wrote it before he died, in case you ever found this place." Eli broke the seal with clumsy fingers. The letter inside was dated just 3 days before Will Sutton's death. Captain Harper. The letter began. If you're reading this, then my worst suspicions have been confirmed, and my family has found refuge with you. I pray that you are still the man I remember from the war, the officer who never left a soldier behind, who led from the front, who believed that courage meant standing up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. Eli's throat tightened. He forced himself to keep reading. I have enclosed everything I gathered on Ezra Blackwood's crimes. Land fraud stretching across 3 counties, connections to corrupt officials in Washington, and evidence circumstantial but compelling that he has arranged the murders of at least 4 people who threatened to expose him. But there is something more. Something I discovered only recently. Blackwood recognized you years ago, Captain. He knows who you are. His son William died at Shiloh in the assault on Union positions that you commanded. Blackwood has nursed that hatred for a decade, and if he ever gets the chance, he will use it to destroy you. I tell you this, not to frighten you, but to warn you. Protect my family, Captain, not just from Blackwood's greed, but from his vengeance. He is a man consumed by the need for revenge, and he will stop at nothing to achieve it. You saved my life once on a blood-soaked field in Tennessee. I cannot repay that debt. But perhaps my faith in you can serve as a reminder of the man you were, and the man I believe you still are. With deepest respect and trust, Lieutenant Will Sutton, 12th Pennsylvania. Eli lowered the letter. His hands were shaking. He'd spent 3 years trying to bury the past, to forget the captain he'd been, and the soldiers who'd followed him through hell. He'd told himself that man was gone dead, alongside Josie and Lily, leaving only the hollow shell that haunted Harper Ridge. But Will Sutton had remembered, had held on to that memory for years, carrying it across the country like a talisman. And when he'd needed to protect his family, he'd reached out across the wilderness to a man he'd trusted with his life on a battlefield more than a decade ago. Mr. Harper. Emma's voice was hesitant. Are you all right? Eli looked at her, really looked, at her fierce eyes and stubborn jaw, at the grief she carried without complaint, at the strength that had somehow survived everything trying to crush it. Your father was a good man, he said finally. One of the best soldiers I ever commanded. I know. I should have known he was here. Should have sought him out. Maybe if I had, maybe you could have saved him. Emma shook her head slowly. Or maybe Mr. Blackwood would have just killed both of you sooner. We can't change the past, Mr. Harper. Papa always said that. We can only choose what comes next. Eli stared at this child who spoke with more wisdom than most adults he'd known. Something shifted in his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. When did you get so smart? He asked gruffly. Emma almost smiled. I had a good teacher. They gathered Will's documents and returned to the main chamber, where Clara still sat beside Samuel, her hand on his chest, counting each shallow breath. The boy's color had improved slightly in the cave's warmth, but his breathing remained labored. Did you find it? Clara asked without looking up. Eli set the metal box beside her. Everything your husband gathered. Evidence of fraud, corruption, murder. Enough to bring Blackwood down. He hesitated. And a letter. From Will. To me. Clara's head lifted. Her eyes searched his face. He knew I served under him. Eli said quietly. Remembered me from the war. He asked me to protect you. All of you. And will you? The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and an offer and a plea all at once. Eli looked at Samuel, still fighting for each breath. At Emma, exhausted but unbowed. At Clara, who had lost everything and still found the strength to keep fighting. He thought of Josie, who had loved him even when he'd been broken by war, who had believed he could heal, could be more than the violence that had shaped him. He thought of Lily, who had never known her father as anything but gentle, who had trusted him to keep her safe from anything the world could throw at them. He had failed them, failed to save them when it mattered most. But maybe, just maybe, he could succeed here. Could honor their memory, not by hiding from pain, but by standing against it. by being the man they'd believed he was. "Yes," Eli said. "I will." Clara's hand found his in the firelight, her fingers cold but steady. "Then we fight together. For Will, for your family, for all of them." "Together," Eli agreed. Outside the cave, the storm had arrived in earnest wind, howling across the mountain like the voices of the dead. But inside, gathered around the fire with the evidence they needed to bring a murderer to justice, they were safe. For now. And somewhere hours behind them, on a snow-choked trail, Ezra Blackwood was discovering that his son had lied. The hunt was about to begin. The storm raged through the night and into the next morning, sealing them inside Eagle Cave like prisoners in a stone tomb. Eli took turns keeping watch at the entrance rifle, ready, eyes straining through the white curtain of snow for any sign of pursuit. Samuel's condition worsened as the hours crawled by. The boy's breathing grew more labored, each inhale a wet, rattling struggle that made Clara flinch every time she heard it. She worked tirelessly, applying poultices from the herbs they'd brought, forcing sips of willow bark tea between his cracked lips, doing everything her training as a nurse's daughter had taught her. It wasn't enough. They all knew it wasn't enough. "He needs a real doctor," Emma said quietly, her voice hollow with exhaustion. She hadn't slept since they'd arrived, refusing to leave her brother's side. "He needs medicine we don't have." "The nearest doctor is in Helena," Eli replied. 2 days' ride in good weather. In this storm, there has to be something." Emma's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "There has to be. Papa wouldn't have sent us here just to watch Sammy die." Clara pulled her daughter close, holding her tight, while her own tears fell silently into Emma's hair. Over their heads, her eyes met Eli's, and he saw the terrible knowledge there, the acceptance of what was coming. "There might be another option," Eli said slowly. Both of them looked at him. "My sister, Abigail." The name felt strange on his tongue after so many years. "She's a doctor, lives about 15 miles from here near Thompson's Creek." Clara's brow furrowed. "You have a sister?" "Had. I thought she died during the war. Turns out she didn't." Eli ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his own ignorance. "Pastor Crane mentioned her a few weeks back. Said a woman doctor had set up practice in the area. I wasn't ready to believe it might be her." "But you think it is?" "She asked about my pocket watch, the one with the dent." Eli pulled the watch from his vest, turning it over in his hands. "I got this from our father. Abby was the only person who knew about the dent. I dropped it during a game when we were children. She teased me about it for years." Hope flickered in Clara's eyes, dangerous hope, the kind that could destroy you if it proved false. "Can we reach her?" "Not in this storm. But if it breaks by morning—" Eli looked toward the cave entrance, where wind shrieked like tortured souls. "If it breaks, I can make it. Alone on horseback traveling light. I could reach her cabin by nightfall and bring her back. And leave us here unprotected. The cave is hidden, well provisioned. You have weapons." Eli's jaw tightened. "It's Samuel's best chance. Maybe his only chance." Clara looked at her son, at his pale face and blue-tinged lips, at the shallow rise and fall of his chest that seemed weaker with every passing hour. "Do it," she said. "Whatever it takes. Save my boy." The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died, first dropping from a howl to a whisper to nothing at all. Then the snow began to thin flakes, falling gently instead of driving horizontally. By the time gray light filtered into the cave, the world outside had transformed into a pristine white silence. Eli prepared to leave with grim efficiency. He took only his rifle, his pistol, and enough food for a single day. Everything else stayed with Clara and Emma, weapons ammunition supplies. "If I'm not back by tomorrow night, take the documents and head for Helena," he told Clara. "Don't wait for me. Don't look back." "Eli, promise me." Clara's eyes searched his face. Whatever she found there made her nod slowly. I promise. He turned to Emma, who stood rigid with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of determined stoicism. Watch over them, both of them. I will. Emma's voice was steady. Mr. Harper. Come back alive. Mama needs you. The words hit him harder than he expected. He nodded once, unable to find words, and headed for the cave entrance. Clara caught his arm before he reached the opening. Eli, wait. He turned back. She stood close to him, closer than she'd ever been, her face tilted up toward his. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For not turning away when you had every reason to. I made a promise to your husband. To protect. This isn't about Will's letter. Clara's hand tightened on his arm. This is about you. The man you are. The man you've been hiding from for 3 years. She paused. Don't hide anymore. Not from your sister. Not from us. Not from yourself. Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief warm contact that burned against his cold skin. Come back to us, she whispered. Please. Then she was gone, retreating to Samuel's side, leaving Eli standing alone, with his heart pounding and his chest aching with something he hadn't felt in years. He stepped out into the snow. The journey to Thompson's Creek nearly killed him 3 times. Once, when his horse stumbled on hidden ice, nearly throwing him into a ravine. Once, when he had to cross a frozen stream that cracked ominously under their combined weight. And once, when he spotted riders in the distance. Blackwood's men, he was certain, and had to hide in a snowbank for nearly an hour while they passed. But he kept moving. Kept pushing. Because every time he wanted to stop to rest, to give up, he saw Samuel's pale face. Heard Emma's fierce voice. Felt Clara's lips against his cheek. Come back to us. He reached the cabin near Thompson's Creek as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. It was a small structure, sturdy and well-maintained, with smoke rising from the chimney and a single horse tethered in the lean-to beside it. Eli dismounted on numb legs, stumbling as he approached the door. His knock was weak, barely more than a tap, but it was enough. The door opened, and there she was. Abigail Harper stood in the doorway, older than he remembered but unmistakable, the same dark hair now streaked with silver, the same sharp eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw that had driven their father to distraction when they were children. Nathan, she breathed, using his first name, the name he'd abandoned years ago. Dear God, it's really you. Abby. His voice broke on the syllable. I thought you were dead. I thought the same about you. She reached out her hand, trembling, and touched his face as if to confirm he was real. They told me your unit was wiped out at Chickamauga. I searched for you after the war, for years. Then I heard about a Eli Harper living as a hermit in the Wyoming mountains, but I couldn't believe. I wasn't sure. It's me. Eli swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never looked for you. I'm sorry I... Later. Abby's expression shifted from wonder to concern as she took in his condition, the frost on his clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes, the desperate edge to his movements. Something's wrong. Tell me. A boy, 8 years old. His lungs are filling with fluid from fever. He's dying, Abby. I need your help. His sister's demeanor changed instantly, the emotional reunion giving way to professional focus. Where is he? Eagle Cave, 15 miles east. His mother's with him, Clara Sutton. She has some medical training, but not enough. Not for this. Abby was already moving, grabbing her medical bag, pulling on her coat. I know Clara Sutton. Her husband brought her to see me once before he died. Wanted me to confirm she was healthy enough to travel. She paused, her eyes meeting Eli's. I heard what happened to Will. I heard the rumors about Blackwood. The rumors are true. All of them. Clara has evidence. Good. Abby's voice hardened. Then let's save her son so she can use it. They rode through the night, Abby matching Eli's punishing pace without complaint. She asked questions as they traveled about Samuel's symptoms, about the treatments Clara had tried, about how long the boy had been sick, her mind already working through possibilities. "It sounds like pneumonia," she said grimly. "Advanced pneumonia. The fluid in his lungs is likely bacterial. Without proper drainage and medication, he could drown in his own secretions." "Can you save him?" Abby was quiet for a long moment. "I can try. That's all any doctor can promise." They reached Eagle Cave as dawn was breaking, the second dawn since Eli had left. He'd been gone nearly 36 hours longer than he'd hoped, shorter than he'd feared. Clara met them at the cave entrance, shotgun raised, her face gaunt with exhaustion and worry. When she recognized Eli, her composure shattered. "You came back," her voice cracked. "You actually came back." "Told you I would." Eli dismounted his legs, nearly giving out. "Clara, this is my sister, Dr. Abigail Harper." Abby was already pushing past them, her medical bag clutched in her hands. "Where's the boy, quickly?" They led her to Samuel's makeshift bed by the fire. The boy looked worse than when Eli had left. His skin had taken on a grayish tint, and his breathing was barely audible. Abby knelt beside him, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening. She checked his pulse, his temperature, the color of his lips and fingernails. Her expression grew grimmer with each examination. "How long since he's been conscious?" she asked. "He woke briefly yesterday afternoon." Clara answered, her voice tight with fear. "Only for a few minutes. He asked for water, then slipped away again." "Has he coughed up anything? Blood-colored mucus?" "Some. Greenish-yellow. This morning, there was a little blood." Abby nodded, reaching into her bag. "I need hot water. As hot as you can get it. Clean cloths. And I need everyone to stay calm no matter what happens next." "What are you going to do?" Emma asked. She hadn't left her brother's side since Eli had returned, her small hand gripping Samuel's limp fingers. "I'm going to drain the fluid from his lungs." Abby pulled out a frightening array of instruments, tubes, syringes, sharp-edged tools that glinted in the firelight. "It's going to look brutal. It's going to sound worse. But if I don't do it, he'll be dead before sunset." Clara's face went white, but she nodded. "Do whatever you have to do. Save my son." The next hour was the longest of Eli's life. He held Clara while Abby worked, feeling her flinch with every sound that came from Samuel's bed, the wet gurgle of fluid being drained, the boy's weak cries of pain when he briefly surfaced from unconsciousness, Emma's soft sobbing as she refused to let go of her brother's hand. Abby's hands never wavered. Her voice remained calm and steady, talking them through each step as she worked to clear Samuel's lungs. "There's more fluid than I expected. That's not necessarily bad. It means the infection had somewhere to go instead of attacking his organs. Hold him still. This part will hurt." Samuel screamed, a thin, reedy sound that tore at Eli's heart. "Almost done. Just a little more. Clara, I need you to keep his head elevated, higher. Yes, like that." Minutes stretched into eternity. The fire crackled. Wind moaned outside the cave. And slowly, impossibly, Samuel's breathing began to change. The wet rattling eased. The grayish tint faded from his skin. His chest began to rise and fall with something approaching normal rhythm. "He's stabilizing." Abby sat back on her heels, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "The worst is over, but he's going to need rest. Real rest in a warm bed with proper food and medicine. He can't travel for at least a week." "We don't have a week." Eli's voice was heavy. "Blackwood's men are hunting us. They've probably already found our trail. Then we make our stand here." Clara's voice was surprisingly steady. "We have weapons. We have a defensible position. And we have something worth fighting for." Abby looked between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're not just running from Blackwood, are you? You're planning to bring him down." "He murdered my husband." Clara's jaw tightened. "He's terrorized families across 3 counties. He's corrupted the law itself. Yes, I'm planning to bring him down, and I'll die before I let him hurt my children again." Abby nodded slowly. Then you'll need help. More than just my brother and his rifle. What kind of help? I know people in Helena, honest people. A federal marshal named Thompson who's been investigating Blackwood for months. A judge named Richardson who can't be bought. Abby's eyes met Clara's. If you can get your evidence to them, Blackwood is finished. We know, Eli said. That's where we were heading before Samuel got worse. Then as soon as he's strong enough to travel, I'll guide you there myself. Abby began packing her instruments. But for now, we wait. We rest. And we pray Blackwood doesn't find us before we're ready to move. The prayer went unanswered. They had 3 days of peace. 3 days of watching Samuel slowly improve, of Clara finally getting real sleep, of Emma learning to smile again. 3 days of Eli and Abby rediscovering the siblings they'd been before the war had torn them apart. On the morning of the 4th day, Eli was keeping watch at the cave entrance when he saw them riders emerging from the tree line, at least 8 of them, moving with the deliberate purpose of men who knew exactly where they were going. They found us, he said quietly. Clara appeared at his shoulder, her face pale but determined. How many? 8, maybe more in reserve. Eli checked his rifle, confirming it was loaded. Blackwood's with them. I can see his coat. Eli. Clara gripped his arm. Samuel can't be moved. If we run, we're not running. Eli met her eyes. Not anymore. This ends here one way or another. He turned to Emma, who had appeared behind her mother, her expression fierce despite her fear. Take your brother deeper into the cave. There are tunnels in the back, your father mapped them. If things go badly, use them. Get to Helena. Find Marshal Thompson. Tell him everything. I'm not leaving you, Emma protested. You're protecting your brother. That's what your father would want. That's what I need you to do. Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and went to Samuel's side. Abby joined them at the entrance, a pistol in her hand. I'm not much of a shot, she admitted. But I won't hide while my brother fights. Abby. Don't. Her voice was firm. I lost you once. I'm not losing you again. Eli looked at the 2 women standing beside him, his sister, who he'd mourned for years, and Clara, who had somehow cracked through the walls he'd built around his heart. Both of them willing to die for something that mattered. All right, he said. Then let's give them something to remember. Blackwood's men spread out as they approached the cave, taking cover behind rocks and trees, their rifles trained on the entrance. Blackwood himself remained at the rear, his expensive coat stark against the snow, his face twisted with something that went beyond simple hatred. Harper. His voice echoed across the clearing. I know you're in there. I know you have the Sutton woman and her brats. This doesn't have to end in blood. Eli stepped into the cave entrance, rifle raised, making himself a target. Funny. That's exactly how I thought it would end. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. You should have stayed on your mountain playing dead. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you murdered a man I served with. When you threatened his widow and children. When you burned your way across this territory thinking no one would stop you. Will Sutton was a fool who stuck his nose where it didn't belong, just like you. Blackwood moved closer, confident in his numbers. My son told me you have evidence. Documents. Hand them over and I might let the women and children live. Your son is twice the man you'll ever be. He warned us you were coming. Something flickered across Blackwood's face. Pain, betrayal, fury before it hardened into stone. Marcus always was weak, takes after his mother. He takes after his conscience. Something you lost a long time ago. Blackwood raised his hand, signaling his men. Last chance, Harper. Surrender the documents or we burn you out. Eli's finger tightened on his trigger. Come and take them. The first shot came from Blackwood's side, a rifle crack that sent stone chips flying inches from Eli's head. He dropped back into the cave, returning fire as Clara and Abby opened up from their positions. The battle was brutal and desperate. Eli's military training kicked in years of instinct, guiding his movements as he fired, reloaded, fired again. Clara proved surprisingly capable with her shotgun driving back two men who tried to rush the entrance. Even Abby contributed her shots wild, but enough to keep the attackers off balance. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. And slowly, inevitably, Blackwood's men gained ground. "We can't hold them!" Abby shouted over the gunfire. "There are too many." "Fall back to the second chamber," Eli ordered. "We'll make them pay for every inch." They retreated deeper into the cave, using the narrow passages as choke points. Eli took a bullet to the shoulder, a grazing wound that burned like fire but didn't stop him from fighting. Clara's shotgun ran empty, and she switched to a pistol, her hands steady, despite the chaos. Blackwood's men poured into the cave, their superior numbers finally overwhelming the defenders. Eli found himself pressed against the wall. His rifle knocked aside Blackwood's massive ranch hand, Jennings looming over him with a knife. "End of the line, hermit," Jennings growled. A shot rang out. Jennings's expression froze, then he crumpled, revealing Emma standing behind him with a smoking pistol in her trembling hands. "Stay away from my family," she said, her voice shaking but determined. Eli grabbed his rifle and pushed forward, using the momentary confusion to drive back the attackers. But there were too many, and they were tired, wounded, running out of ammunition. Then impossibly new gunfire erupted from outside the cave. Not Blackwood's men, someone else. Multiple shooters, disciplined and accurate, cutting down the attackers from behind. "Federal marshals," a voice shouted. "Drop your weapons, everyone down on the ground now." Blackwood's men hesitated, caught between the defenders in the cave and the new threat behind them. One by one they dropped their guns and raised their hands. But Blackwood himself didn't surrender. He pushed through the confusion, his face contorted with rage, a pistol in his hand, his eyes locked on Eli with murderous intent. "If I'm going to hang," he snarled, "I'm taking you with me." He raised his gun. Two shots rang out simultaneously. Blackwood staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at Eli, who hadn't fired. Behind him, Marcus Blackwood stood with a smoking pistol, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Father," Marcus whispered, "but I couldn't let you kill anyone else." Ezra Blackwood fell to his knees, then forward onto his face and moved no more. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Marshal Thompson appeared in the cave entrance, his badge glinting in the firelight, his expression grim but satisfied. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, "I believe you have some documents for me." Clara's hands trembled as she pulled Will's documents from the hidden compartment in her saddlebag. The papers were creased and worn from the journey, but intact. Everything her husband had died for, everything Blackwood had killed to suppress, now passed into Marshal Thompson's waiting hands. "Mrs. Sutton," Thompson's voice was gentle as he accepted the evidence. "Your husband was a brave man. What he gathered here will bring down one of the largest corruption rings in the territory." Clara nodded, unable to speak. Behind her, Emma pressed close against her side, and Samuel, still weak but alive, wonderfully alive, clung to her hand with surprising strength. "How did you find us?" Eli asked. He sat against the cave wall, Abby tending to his wounded shoulder with efficient hands. The bullet had passed clean through, leaving a bloody furrow that would scar but not cripple. "Your friend Marcus." Thompson gestured toward the young Blackwood who sat apart from everyone else, his face pale and devastated. "He rode to Helena 3 days ago. Told us everything, his father's location, his plans, where you were hiding. Said he couldn't live with himself if more innocent people died." Eli looked at Marcus, seeing not the banker's son, but a young man who had chosen conscience over blood. It was perhaps the hardest choice anyone could make. "He shot his own father," Emma said quietly. "To save us." "To save everyone." Thompson's voice was heavy. "Ezra Blackwood would have killed you all and burned the evidence. Marcus knew that. He did what had to be done." Marcus looked up at that, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Don't make me sound like a hero. I'm not. I waited too long. I knew what my father was becoming, and I did nothing. People died because I was a coward. People lived because you found your courage. Clara crossed to him, her movements slow but deliberate. My children are alive because of you. That matters, Marcus. Whatever else happens, that matters. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then something broke in his expression, and he began to weep, the deep, racking sobs of a man who had lost everything and wasn't sure he deserved to survive it. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder and let him cry. The journey to Helena took 5 days. Samuel traveled in a wagon commandeered from Blackwood's men, cushioned by blankets, and watched over constantly by Abby. His recovery was slow but steady, each day bringing more color to his cheeks and more strength to his voice. "Dr. Harper," he asked on the 3rd day, his voice still weak but curious. Abby looked up from the medical journal she'd been reading. "Yes, Samuel. Are you really Mr. Eli's sister, the one he thought was dead?" "I am." That must have been a big surprise, finding each other again. Abby glanced toward the front of the wagon, where Eli rode alongside Clara, their horses moving in easy rhythm. "The biggest surprise of my life, but the best kind." Samuel considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old who had seen too much of death. "I'm glad you found each other. It's important to have family." "Yes," Abby's voice softened. "It is." Emma rode beside Marshal Thompson's deputies, peppering them with questions about law enforcement that they answered with bemused patience. The fierce protectiveness that had defined her throughout the ordeal was slowly giving way to something else, curiosity about the world beyond survival. Interest in a future she was finally starting to believe she might have. "She's remarkable," Thompson observed to Clara during a rest stop. "Most children would be destroyed by what she's been through. Emma has her father's strength." Clara watched her daughter demonstrate proper shotgun loading technique to an impressed deputy. "Will always said she'd change the world someday. I'm starting to believe him." "And the boy?" Clara's gaze shifted to the wagon where Samuel's laughter rang out at something Abby had said. "Samuel has his father's heart. He sees good in people even when they don't deserve it. Even now, after everything, he asked me if Mr. Marcus would be okay." Thompson was quiet for a moment. "What will you do after the trial?" Clara's eyes found Eli, who stood apart from the group checking his horse's hooves with the automatic efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and something passed between them, a question, a promise, a possibility. "I don't know yet," Clara said honestly, "but I think I'm ready to find out." Helena bustled with activity when they arrived, word of Blackwood's death having preceded them. People lined the streets, some curious, some hostile, most simply shocked that the untouchable banker had finally fallen. Judge Richardson met them at the courthouse steps, his stern face betraying nothing as he reviewed the documents Clara provided. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "Land fraud, forgery, conspiracy, bribery of federal officials." His eyes lifted to meet Clara's. "And evidence strongly suggesting murder. Multiple murders." "My husband was one of them." Clara's voice didn't waver. "I want his name cleared. I want the world to know he died trying to protect innocent people." "You'll have that and more, Mrs. Sutton." Richardson turned to Thompson. "Marshal, I want every person named in these documents arrested by week's end. Start with the land office officials in Washington. This corruption stops now." The arrests began that afternoon. 3 land office clerks, 2 territorial surveyors, a county sheriff, and a half-dozen businessmen who had profited from Blackwood's schemes, all taken into custody within 72 hours. The scope of the conspiracy stunned even hardened investigators. "He had his fingers in everything," Thompson reported during a meeting at the courthouse. "Railroad contracts, mining rights, territorial politics. Blackwood wasn't just a corrupt banker, he was building an empire. An empire built on blood and stolen land." Judge Richardson's voice was grim. "The families he ruined, the lives he destroyed. It will take years to unravel the damage. What about restitution? Eli asked. He'd been quiet through most of the proceedings, uncomfortable with the attention that came from his role in Blackwood's downfall. The people Blackwood cheated out of their land, can they get it back? That's complicated. Richardson removed his spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Many of those properties have changed hands multiple times. Some families have left the territory entirely. But we'll do what we can. Every legitimate claim will be reviewed. And Marcus Blackwood? Clara asked. What happens to him? The room went quiet. Marcus had been held in protective custody since their arrival, his fate uncertain. The law was clear about patricide regardless of circumstances. His case is unusual. Richardson chose his words carefully. He killed his father to prevent the murder of innocent people. There are witnesses to that effect, yourself included, Mrs. Sutton. Under the circumstances, I'm inclined toward leniency. He should be pardoned. Emma's voice cut through the adult conversation with startling clarity. Everyone turned to look at her. Marcus saved our lives. He gave up everything, his family, his name, his future, to do the right thing. That should count for something. Richardson studied the 11-year-old with something like respect. You make a compelling argument, young lady. It's the truth. Papa always said the truth matters more than anything. Your father was a wise man. Richardson turned to Thompson. Marshal, draft a recommendation for clemency. Full pardon conditional on Marcus Blackwood's cooperation with ongoing investigations. I'll present it to the territorial governor personally. Relief flooded Clara's face. Whatever Marcus had done, whatever his father had been, the young man had chosen redemption when it mattered most. He deserved a second chance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. One by one, Blackwood's co-conspirators faced justice. Some pleaded guilty, hoping for lighter sentences. Others fought the charges only to be overwhelmed by the evidence Will Sutton had gathered. By the end, 17 men had been convicted, and warrants had been issued for a dozen more who had fled the territory. Clara testified twice, once about her husband's murder, once about the threats against her family. She spoke clearly, and without tears, her voice steady, as she recounted the terror of those weeks, the desperation of their flight, the moment when Eli Harper had appeared in the snow and changed everything. Mrs. Sutton, the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, you claim Mr. Blackwood murdered your husband, but you have no direct evidence of this, no witnesses, no confession. I have my husband's own words. Clara held up Will's journal, now entered into evidence. He documented everything. The threats, the surveillance, his certainty that Blackwood would kill him if he didn't stop investigating. He knew what was coming. He prepared for it. He prepared by hiding evidence in a cave. He prepared by trusting that if anything happened to him, the truth would eventually come out. Clara's eyes swept the courtroom, landing briefly on Eli in the gallery. He was right. The prosecutor had no further questions. Eli testified once briefly about his role in the events. He spoke in clipped sentences, uncomfortable with the attention, downplaying his own actions. You confronted armed men to protect strangers. The defense attorney pressed, trying to paint him as a vigilante. I confronted armed men who were threatening a woman and children. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Mr. Harper. You have military training, combat experience. You knew exactly what you were doing. I knew what was right. Eli's voice hardened. That didn't require training. After the trial, life began to find a new rhythm. Abby returned to her practice near Thompson's Creek, but made weekly visits to Helena to check on Samuel's recovery. The bond between her and Clara deepened with each visit, two strong women recognizing kinship in each other. He's almost fully recovered, Abby reported during one such visit after examining Samuel. Another month of rest and good food, and you'd never know how close we came to losing him. Clara's eyes glistened. I can never repay what you did, what you and Eli both did. You don't owe us anything. Abby smiled, glancing toward the window where Eli stood talking with Emma in the yard below. Besides, I think we've already been repaid. My brother smiles now. He laughs. I didn't think I'd ever see that again. He's different than when we first met. Clara followed Abby's gaze. Less haunted. He's healing. You gave him that. You and your children. Clara was quiet for a moment. He's asked me to come back to his ranch, all of us, when Samuel is strong enough to travel. And what did you say? I said I needed time to think. Clara turned away from the window. I loved Will. I still love him. Part of me always will. Of course you will. That's not a betrayal of what might come next. It's a foundation for it. Abby took Clara's hands in her own. My brother lost his wife and daughter 3 years ago. He buried his heart along with them. I'd given up hope of him ever finding his way back to the living. Her grip tightened. Then you appeared. You and Emma and Samuel. And somehow, impossibly, he started to thaw. I don't want to replace what he lost. You couldn't even if you tried, just like he couldn't replace Will. Abby's voice was gentle but firm. But that's not what love is, Clara. Love isn't about replacing what came before. It's about finding the courage to add something new. Clara didn't respond. But later that afternoon, when Eli joined them for dinner, she found herself watching him differently, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when Samuel told a joke, the gentle patience he showed when Emma peppered him with questions about horses, the quiet strength that had carried them through darkness and delivered them into light. Maybe, she thought. Maybe. The formal exoneration of William Sutton came on a cold morning in late February. Judge Richardson read the proclamation himself in a packed courtroom filled with journalists, officials, and the families of other victims. Will's name was cleared of all the false accusations Blackwood had spread. His work was recognized as crucial to exposing the corruption. His death was officially ruled a murder perpetrated by Ezra Blackwood and his associates. Clara stood in the front row, Emma and Samuel on either side, listening to the words she'd fought so hard to hear. William Sutton was a man of integrity, Richardson concluded. He saw injustice and refused to look away, even when looking away would have been safer. He paid for that courage with his life. But his sacrifice was not in vain. Because of his work, justice has been served. Because of his family's perseverance, the truth has been told. Richardson turned to Clara directly. Mrs. Sutton, on behalf of the territory of Wyoming and the United States government, I offer our deepest apologies for what you and your children have endured. Your husband was a hero. He deserves to be remembered as one. Clara stepped forward to accept the official document, Will's posthumous commendation. Her vision blurred by tears she no longer tried to hide. Thank you, she managed. Thank you for giving my children their father back. Emma squeezed her hand, and Samuel pressed close against her side, and for the first time since that terrible morning when they'd found Will's body at the bottom of that cliff, Clara felt something other than grief. She felt free. After the ceremony, Eli found her standing alone outside the courthouse, the commendation clutched to her chest, her face raised to the winter sun. Clara! She turned at his voice, and the look that passed between them held no words but spoke volumes. It's over, she said softly. It's really over. The hard part is. Eli moved to stand beside her close, but not touching. What comes next is up to you. Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his face. Your offer, the ranch, is it still open? Eli's breath caught. Always. I need you to understand something. Clara's voice was steady but fierce. I'm not looking for a savior. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me. I can take care of myself. I've proven that. I know. And I still love Will. Part of me always will. That's not going to change. I wouldn't want it to. Eli's voice roughened. I still love Josie. I visit her grave every morning. I talk to her and Lily like they're still there. That's not going to change either. Clara nodded slowly. So what is this? What are we doing? Eli reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. We're two broken people who found each other in a storm. We're not replacing what we lost. We're not forgetting. We're just... He struggled for words. We're choosing to keep living. Together. If you want. Emma adores you. Clara's lips curved slightly. Samuel wants you to teach him to ride a horse. A real horse, not a pony. And their mother? What does she want? Clara closed the distance between them, pressing her forehead against his chest. She felt his arms come around her, tentative at first, then stronger, holding her like something precious. Their mother wants to stop being afraid, she whispered. She wants to wake up without dreading what the day might bring. She wants her children to have a home, a real home, not just a place to sleep. I can offer that. Eli's voice rumbled through his chest. The ranch is big enough for all of you. The land is good. The silence takes some getting used to, but... Clara pulled back to look at him. The silence won't last long, not with Samuel and Emma around. I'm counting on that. For the first time since Will's death, Clara laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her by the dry humor in Eli's voice. Is that a yes? Eli asked. Clara reached up, touching his face the way she'd wanted to for weeks. That's a yes. Marcus Blackwood was pardoned on the first day of March. The ceremony was small, private, attended only by Judge Richardson Marshall Thompson, and at Clara's insistence, the Sutton family and Eli. Marcus stood rigid throughout the proceedings, his face expressionless, but his hands trembled as he accepted the official pardon. You've been given a second chance, Richardson told him. Use it wisely. Yes, sir. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. After the ceremony, Clara approached him while the others talked amongst themselves. What will you do now? She asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. I don't know. Everything I had came from my father. The house, the money, the name, it's all tainted now. I can't touch any of it. You could start over. Somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows the Blackwood name. Maybe. Marcus's eyes were haunted. Or maybe I could stay. Try to make amends. The families my father hurt, they deserve more than justice. They deserve someone to help them rebuild. Clara studied him for a long moment. That's a hard path. It's the right path. Marcus met her gaze directly. Your husband taught me that, Mrs. Sutton. Through his journal, his words. He believed that truth mattered more than comfort, that doing right mattered more than being safe. His voice cracked. I want to believe that too. Clara reached out and took his hand. Then you will. And if you ever need help, ever, you know where to find us. Marcus's eyes glistened. Thank you. For everything. I don't deserve your kindness. None of us deserve the kindness we receive. Clara squeezed his hand once, then released it. That's what makes it kindness. They left Helena the following week. The journey back to Eli's ranch took 4 days leisurely this time, with no pursuit behind them and no desperate urgency driving them forward. Samuel rode in the wagon, still not strong enough for horseback, but he chattered constantly about the ranch, about horses, about all the things Eli had promised to teach him. Emma rode alongside Clara, her seat more confident now, her fear of the wilderness replaced by growing familiarity. She still asked endless questions, but they had changed less about survival, more about the future. Can I have my own horse? She asked, as they crested the ridge overlooking Eli's valley. We'll see, Clara replied, though her smile suggested the answer would be yes. And can I learn to shoot properly? Mr. Eli says I have good instincts, but my form needs work. That seems reasonable. And can we get a dog? Papa always promised we'd get a dog when we settled somewhere permanent. Clara looked at the ranch spread out below them. The sturdy cabin, the solid barn, the 2 small crosses on the hill that marked Eli's old grief, and felt something bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or its close cousin home. Yes, Emma, she said softly. We can get a dog. Eli rode ahead, pointing out landmarks to Samuel in the wagon. His voice carried back on the wind, warm, patient, alive, in a way Clara suspected he hadn't been for years. That's Bear Creek over there, best fishing in the territory, and those peaks to the north, that's where the eagles nest in spring. I'll take you to see them when you're stronger. Promise? Samuel's voice was eager. Promise. Abby brought up the rear, her medical bag secured to her saddle, her eyes watchful but content. She had agreed to stay for a few weeks to monitor Samuel's recovery, and to reconnect with the brother she'd mourned for so long. You know, she called forward to Eli, this is the first time I've seen you smile 3 days in a row since we were children. Exaggeration, Eli replied, but his grin widened. It's not, and you know it. Abby urged her horse forward to ride beside him. I like this version of you, brother, the living one. I'm working on it. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and rose. Eli dismounted first, moving to help Clara down from her horse. Their hands met held. Welcome home, he said quietly. Clara looked at the cabin, at the smoke already rising from the chimney, where Eli had banked coals that morning, at the windows glowing with warm light, at the door standing open in welcome. Then she looked at her children, at Samuel, already being helped from the wagon by Abby, at Emma standing tall with her father's journal tucked under her arm. Finally, she looked at Eli, at the man who had emerged from grief to save them, who had risked everything to protect them, who was offering them not just shelter, but family. Home, she repeated, tasting the word. Yes, I think it is. Spring arrived slowly to the Wyoming mountains, melting the snow in patches, revealing earth that had slept beneath winter's blanket for months. Clara stood on the cabin porch, watching Samuel chase after a butterfly near the barn, his laughter ringing across the valley like bells. 3 months had passed since they'd arrived at Eli's ranch. 3 months of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to breathe again. He's getting stronger every day. Abby joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She'd extended her stay twice now, always finding another reason to delay her return to Thompson's Creek. Thanks to you. Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. I don't know what would have happened if Eli hadn't found you in time. You would have found another way. You always do. Abby's eyes followed Samuel as he tumbled in the grass, giggling. But I'm glad I was there. Glad for more reasons than just the medicine. Clara understood. The bond between Abby and the children had grown deep over these months. She was Aunt Abby now, a title Samuel had bestowed with great ceremony, and Emma had accepted with quiet approval. Have you decided yet? Clara asked. About staying. Abby was quiet for a long moment. I've been practicing medicine alone for 15 years. Moving from town to town, never putting down roots. I told myself it was because no one would accept a woman doctor that I had to keep moving to find patients. She shook her head slowly. But the truth is, I was running. From memories, from loss, from the fear of losing anyone else. And now I have a brother again. A family. Abby's voice softened. I've been offered a position at the new clinic in Copper Creek. Permanent. With a house and everything. Clara's heart leaped. Abby, that's wonderful. It's terrifying. Abby laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. I'd be less than an hour's ride from here, close enough to visit every week, close enough to watch these children grow up, close enough to be family. Yes. Abby took a shaky breath. I think I'm going to say yes. Clara pulled her into a hug, feeling the other woman's surprise melt into grateful acceptance. They stood that way for a long moment, 2 women who had found sisterhood, not through blood, but through shared struggle and survival. What's all this? Eli's voice came from behind them. He'd emerged from the barn leading the mare Samuel had claimed as his own, a gentle creature named Buttercup, who tolerated the boy's enthusiastic affection with patient grace. Good news? Clara replied, releasing Abby. Your sister is moving to Copper Creek. Permanently. Something shifted in Eli's expression, a crack in the stoic facade he still sometimes wore, revealing the man beneath. You're staying. I'm staying. Abby smiled at him. Someone has to keep you out of trouble. Clara can't do it alone. Eli crossed the yard in 3 long strides and pulled his sister into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. Abby laughed, swatting at his shoulder, but she held on just as tightly. Samuel abandoned his butterfly chase to join them, wrapping his small arms around both adults' legs. Does this mean Aunt Abby will be here for my birthday? You promised to teach me to ride without holding the reins. I'll be here for every birthday, Abby promised, ruffling his hair. Every Christmas too, and probably most Sundays in between. What about right now? Samuel's eyes sparkled with hope. Can we practice right now? After lunch? Clara interjected, recognizing the look on her son's face. And only if you finish your reading lessons first. Samuel's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but he nodded. Yes, Mama. As he scampered toward the house, Emma emerged from the barn carrying a basket of eggs, her movements confident and unhurried. She'd changed over these months, grown taller, lost some of the sharp wariness that had defined her. She smiled more now, laughed more, though the fierce protectiveness never fully left her eyes. 12 eggs, she announced. The brown hen finally started laying again. Excellent. Clara took the basket. We'll have plenty for the church social next week. Emma's expression flickered. Do I have to go? Yes. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. Part of living somewhere is being part of the community. Your father would want you to make friends, not hide on a mountain. I'm not hiding. Emma struggled for words. I'm comfortable here. With us. I don't need other people. Need and want are different things, sweetheart. Clara touched her daughter's cheek. And wanting connection isn't a weakness. It's human. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness that had always characterized her, she asked, Is that why you and Mr. Eli are getting married? The question hung in the air. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. We haven't discussed marriage, she said carefully. But you will. Soon. Emma's gaze was uncomfortably perceptive. I've seen how he looks at you. And how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Eli had gone very still near the barn door. Abby suddenly found something fascinating to examine on her coffee cup. Emma? I'm not upset. Emma's voice softened. Papa's gone. Nothing will change that. But you're still here and you deserve to be happy. She paused. Mr. Eli makes you happy. I can see it. Samuel can see it too, even if he's too young to understand. Clara's throat tightened. When did you get so wise? I've been paying attention. Emma glanced at Eli, then back at her mother. Papa trusted him with our lives. I think he'd trust him with this too. Before Clara could respond, Emma turned and walked toward the house, leaving the adults in stunned silence. Abby cleared her throat. Well, that happened. Eli crossed to Clara's side, his movements uncertain in a way she rarely saw. Clara, I wasn't planning to. I know. Clara took his hand, feeling calloused fingers curl around hers. It's too soon. Too complicated. There's too much history between us. Is there? Eli's voice was rough. Because from where I'm standing, history is all we have. History and whatever we choose to build next. Clara looked at him, really looked, at the gray threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into too many sunrises, at the scar on his shoulder where Blackwood's bullet had grazed him still pink and healing, at the man who had been dead inside until she and her children had stumbled into his life and reminded him how to live. Ask me, she said quietly. Clara, ask me. Not because Emma expects it. Not because it's proper. Ask me because you want to. Eli's breath caught. His free hand came up to touch her face, gentle, as if she might break. Clara Elizabeth Sutton. His voice was barely above a whisper. Would you consider maybe someday, when you're ready, being my wife? Clara laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised them both. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. I'm out of practice. Clearly. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his brief warm, full of promise. Yes, Eli. When I'm ready. Someday. Yes. From the cabin window, Samuel's face appeared pressed against the glass. Mama, are you kissing Mr. Eli? Clara pulled back, her cheeks flushed. Maybe. Does this mean he's going to be our new papa? We'll talk about it later. Emma says you're getting married. Are you getting married? Can I be in the wedding? Can Buttercup come too? Samuel. Eli's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Go finish your reading lessons. But, now. Samuel disappeared from the window with remarkable speed. Clara shook her head, fighting a smile. You're good at that. At what? At being a father. Eli went still. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither had fully acknowledged. I had practice once, he said finally. Before. I know. Clara squeezed his hand. Tell me about her, about Lily. They walked together toward the two small crosses on the hill, a path Eli had walked alone every morning for 3 years. He'd never invited anyone to join him. Never spoken of his daughter to anyone but the wind and his own memories. But as they stood before the graves, something shifted in his chest. The weight he'd carried for so long didn't disappear, but it moved, made room for something new. She was 4 when she died. He began, his voice rough. Would have been 5 the next month. Josie had already made her birthday dress blue with white ribbons, Lily's favorite colors. Clara listened without interrupting, her hand warm in his. She had her mother's smile, this big gap-toothed grin that could light up a room, and she laughed at everything. I'd come home from working the cattle tired and dirty, and she'd run to meet me like I'd been gone for years instead of hours. The words came easier now, spilling out like water through a broken dam. She loved horses, wanted to ride before she could walk. I was teaching her, starting with just sitting in the saddle while I led her around the corral. She called it flying. Eli's voice cracked. She said someday she was going to fly all the way to the moon. She sounds wonderful. She was. Eli knelt before the smaller cross, his fingers tracing the carved letters of his daughter's name. I've spent 3 years trying to forget her, trying to forget both of them. I thought if I could just stop feeling, the pain would stop too. Did it work? No. It just meant I stopped feeling everything else too. He looked up at Clara, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then you came, you and Emma and Samuel. And suddenly, there was something to feel again. Something other than pain. Clara knelt beside him, her dress spreading across the patchy snow. Eli, listen to me. Loving us doesn't mean you loved them less. Opening your heart again doesn't erase what you had before. I know. I'm starting to know. He took a shaky breath. But sometimes in the quiet moments, I feel guilty, like I'm betraying them by being happy. Do you think Josie would want you to spend the rest of your life alone? The question was gentle, but it struck deep. Eli closed his eyes, remembering his wife's face. Not the pale, still features of death, but the vibrant woman who had laughed at his jokes and challenged his stubbornness and loved him fiercely despite all his flaws. No, he admitted. She'd probably be angry at me for taking so long. Then honor her by living. Honor Lily by loving other children who need a father. Clara's voice was firm. That's not betrayal. That's the greatest tribute you could give them. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate gold chain, Josie's necklace, the one he'd kept hidden in a drawer for 3 years, unable to look at, but unable to throw away. "I want you to have this," he said. "Not to replace her. Never that. But to continue what she started, the family she wanted, the home she dreamed of." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Eli, I can't. Please." His voice was rough. "She would have loved you. I know she would have. And she would have wanted this, for me to find someone strong enough to pull me back from the edge." He pressed the necklace into her hands. "You saved my life, Clara, in every way that matters. Let me give you this." Clara looked at the necklace, at the simple gold chain with its small heart pendant. She thought of Will of the ring she still wore on a chain around her neck. 2 loves, 2 losses, 2 chances to start again. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Eli fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. When he was done, he touched the pendant lightly, then touched his own chest, where Josie's wedding ring hung on its leather cord. "Together," he said. "All of them. All of us. Together." Clara kissed him, then properly this time, without holding back. On the hill beside 2 small graves with spring slowly awakening the valley around them, 2 broken people found something they'd both thought lost forever. Hope. The wedding took place in June, when wildflowers carpeted the valley, and the days stretched long and golden. Pastor Crane performed the ceremony on the cabin's porch with half of Copper Creek in attendance. Abby served as Clara's witness, her eyes bright with tears she refused to acknowledge. Marshall Thompson stood up for Eli, having made the journey from Helena specifically for the occasion. Samuel fidgeted through the vows, barely containing his excitement. He'd been given the important job of carrying the rings, and he clutched the small velvet pouch like it contained the crown jewels. Emma stood beside her mother, straight and proud, her father's journal tucked in her pocket as always. She'd insisted on wearing the blue dress Clara had made for the occasion, blue with white ribbons in honor of the little girl who would have been their sister. "Do you, Eli Nathan Harper, take this woman to be your wife?" Eli's eyes never left Clara's face. "I do." "And do you, Clara Elizabeth Sutton, take this man to be your husband?" Clara smiled, the expression transforming her whole face. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and the Lord Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Crane beamed. "You may kiss your bride." Eli pulled Clara close and kissed her thoroughly, to enthusiastic applause from the gathered crowd and exaggerated gagging sounds from Samuel. "Does this mean I can call him Papa now?" Samuel asked Emma in a whisper that carried across the entire gathering. "Yes," Emma replied, her voice steady but her eyes bright. "I think it does." The celebration continued until sunset, with food and music and dancing on the newly cleared ground beside the barn. Clara moved through it all in a happy daze, accepting congratulations, dancing with her new husband, watching her children laugh and play with the town children they'd finally allowed themselves to befriend. As the last guests departed and twilight settled over the valley, Eli found Clara standing at the edge of the property, looking toward the 2 crosses on the hill. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "No." Clara leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "Just talking to them, telling them about today." Eli was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I told Josie thank you, for raising the kind of man who would walk through fire for strangers, who would open his home to a desperate widow and her children." Clara's voice softened. "And I told Lily that her papa is going to be okay now, that he's not alone anymore." Eli's arm tightened around her. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I talked to Will this morning, at his grave back in Helena." Clara turned to look at him, surprised. "You went to Helena?" "Rode out before dawn, had to be back for the wedding." Eli's jaw worked. "I told him I'd take care of you. All of you. That I'd honor his memory by being the husband and father he wanted you to have. What else? I thanked him for trusting me, for believing I was still capable of being the man he remembered. Eli met her eyes, and I promised him that I'd make sure Emma and Samuel never forget him, that they'll know who their father was and what he sacrificed for them. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Eli. He saved my life too, you know. Not just during the war. By sending you to me. By giving me a reason to stop hiding and start living again. Eli touched her face gently. We're connected, Clara. All of us. The living and the dead. And the love and the loss. It's all part of the same story. Our story. Our story. From the cabin, Samuel's voice rang out. Mama, Papa Emma won't let me have more cake. You've had 3 pieces already, Emma shouted back. It's a special day. Every day is special according to you. Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. I should go referee. I'll handle it. Eli pressed a kiss to her forehead. Stay here as long as you need. She watched him walk toward the cabin, toward the light spilling from the windows, toward the sounds of squabbling children and home. Watched him kneel down to Samuel's level, speaking words she couldn't hear but could imagine. Watched Emma's resistant posture soften as he included her in whatever compromise he was negotiating. Her family. Hers. Clara turned back to the crosses on the hill, to the graves of a woman and child she'd never met, but who had shaped the man she loved. Thank you, she whispered to the fading light. For him. For this. For all of it. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of wildflowers and new grass, and Clara could almost believe she heard an answer in its sigh. 1 year later. Clara stood on the cabin porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Inside, she could hear Eli and Samuel arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Emma's voice cut in, settling the dispute with typical efficiency. The cabin had grown over the past year. A new room for Emma, who had declared herself too old to share with her brother. An expanded kitchen to accommodate Abby's frequent visits. A nursery freshly painted and waiting for the child who would arrive with the autumn leaves. So much had changed. So much remained the same. Samuel was 10 now, tall and sturdy, his illness a distant memory. He rode Buttercup with confident grace and spent hours trailing after Eli, learning the 1,000 small skills of ranching life. He still asked endless questions, still laughed at everything, still filled the cabin with noise and energy and joy. Emma was 12, poised on the edge of womanhood. She'd inherited her father's sharp mind and her mother's quiet strength. She kept Will's journal on her nightstand, reading passages aloud to Samuel, sometimes keeping their father's memory alive. She'd started writing her own journal too, recording their new life, their new family, the story that was still being written. Abby visited every Sunday without fail, bringing news from Copper Creek and medical supplies Clara would need for the delivery. She'd become the aunt the children had never had, the sister Clara had always wanted. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing month. And Eli. Clara watched him emerge from the cabin, Samuel on his heels, both of them laughing at some private joke. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by something warmer, more alive. He still visited the graves every morning, still carried Josie's ring against his heart, but the grief no longer consumed him. It had transformed into something gentler, not forgotten, but integrated. Part of who he was, not all that defined him. He caught her eye across the yard and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. Good morning, Mrs. Harper. Good morning, Mr. Harper. Samuel bounded up the porch steps. Mama, Papa says I can help with the new fold today. Can I please? If you finish your lessons first. I already did. Emma helped me before breakfast. Clara raised an eyebrow at Emma, who had followed her brother outside. Is this true? He was up before dawn? Emma confirmed. Couldn't sleep. So we did mathematics until the sun came up. Ambitious. Clara ruffled Samuel's hair. All right, you can help with the foal, but be careful. Samuel whooped with joy and raced toward the barn. Eli followed more slowly, pausing to kiss Clara's cheek as he passed. How are you feeling? Tired, happy, grateful. That's a good combination. His hand touched her belly gently, feeling the movement within. Have you decided on a name yet? Clara smiled. If it's a boy, William Thomas. For our fathers. Eli's breath caught. Thomas had been his father's name, the father whose pocket watch he still carried everywhere. And if it's a girl, I was thinking... Clara hesitated. I was thinking Lily Rose. If that's okay. For a moment, Eli couldn't speak. His eyes glistened in the morning light. It's more than okay, he managed. It's perfect. He kissed her, then soft, sweet, full of promises and possibilities. When they parted, Emma was watching them with a knowing smile. You two are ridiculous, she said, but there was affection in her voice. We're in love, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Is there? When you're older, you'll understand. Emma rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation, but she was still smiling as she headed toward the barn to help her brother. Clara and Eli watched her go, their hands intertwined. She's becoming a remarkable young woman, Eli said. She always was. She just needed a chance to show it. Like her mother. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. The baby kicked, and Eli's hand tightened on her belly, feeling the movement. Do you ever wonder? Clara asked softly. What would have happened if you hadn't heard those gunshots? If you just kept riding? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I couldn't have kept riding, even if I'd wanted to. Some things are meant to be, Clara. Some roads lead exactly where they're supposed to, even when we think we're lost. You believe that? I do now. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I spent 3 years running from grief. 3 years hiding from the world because I was afraid of feeling anything again. And then you appeared, this fierce, stubborn, impossibly brave woman with 2 children who needed protecting, and suddenly I remembered what I was living for. What was that? Love, connection, the chance to make something beautiful from all the broken pieces. Eli's voice deepened. You gave me that, Clara. You and Emma and Samuel. You gave me a reason to stop surviving and start living. Clara's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind, the kind she'd almost forgotten existed during those terrible months after Will's death. We saved each other, she said. All of us. That's what family does. Eli nodded slowly. That's what family does. From the barn, Samuel's excited shout rang out. Mama, Papa! The foal is standing! Come see! Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. Duty calls. Always does. But Eli's smile was content at peace. They walked toward the barn together, hand in hand, toward their children and their animals, and the 1,000 small tasks that made up a life. Behind them, the sun rose higher over the Wyoming mountains, bathing the valley in golden light. Ahead of them stretched all the days to come, days of work and laughter and love, of challenges faced and overcome, of a family forged not just from blood, but from choice. On the hill, 2 small crosses stood watch over it all, their shadows long in the morning light. And if you listened closely, you might almost hear the wind whisper across the valley, carrying blessings from those who had gone before. Clara paused at the barn door, looking back at the cabin, at the crosses, at the life she'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Thank you, she murmured to no one and everyone, for bringing me home. Then she stepped inside into warmth and light and family, and let the door close behind her on all the darkness of the past. The story had ended. A new one had begun. And in a valley in Wyoming, where snow fell deep in winter, and wildflowers bloomed bright in spring. A widow and a cowboy and 2 children had found what they'd been searching for all along. Not just shelter from the storm, not just safety from their enemies, but something far more precious. A place where broken hearts could mend, where lost souls could find their way, where love patient and enduring could take root in even the rockiest soil and grow toward the light. Home, at last and forever home.